Hey, welcome back to the Unbelievable Podcast. I am BJ Reidell, back here with my guy, Drew Mahowald. And today we are talking about your Minnesota Vikings on bye week. Uh, Normally it'd be a little bit more exciting. Normally we'd be doing, some sort of a recap or, what type of excitement there is to follow the team's bye week. And unfortunately, 2020 has had its effect on the Vikings as well, and us Minnesotans have had that aspect of our life taken from us too. So your Minnesota Vikings stand at 1-5. There's no way around it. That's just the way it is. There's 10 games left to be played. The Vikings' chances of making the postseason at this point in time are under 5% across the board, whether that's a wild card spot, a division spot, or anything else of that nature. And we have to accept that as fans. So we're singing the bye week blues today, and Drew and I will talk about a little about kind of how we got to this point. The point where players like Ngakoue are being traded 6 weeks into their career, and the rumors are swirling about veterans that have been with this team since the Zimmer admin began. And we'll talk about what there is to look forward to, because I know that if you're listening to this podcast, you're planning on watching the remaining 10 games this year. So you're with Drew and I in that boat. And what is there to watch if it's not just about trying to make the postseason? So we'll go over some of that as well, and that's how we'll spend our bye week. So um, that's the plan for today's show. So let's just jump into it. And I'm going to start us with a very simple question that has a very wide range of answers and can be probably explained in a variety of different tones and volume levels depending on who you're speaking with. And how did I'm going to keep it very straightforward. How do we get to this point, Drew? How did the Vikings get to being 1-5, staring down a bye week, entering a position where next week, when they do get to play again, they're playing the Green Bay Packers at Lambeau Field with, essentially that's our Super Bowl. That's the Super Bowl that Vikings fans, Packers fans make the joke every year, right? They always make the joke. They're like, oh, Vikings fans, they only care about beating the Packers. Well, that's not normally true, but they're on the money. So how did we get here?
Stubbornness, if I can be harsh about it. Stubbornness in the faith of Kirk Cousins at this point, right? Being, the decision not to let him play out the final year of his deal and instead extending him based on, probably one or two throws in that Saints playoff game. Now, that might not have been the only deciding factor, but certainly there's a decent chance that the extension is not made if the Vikings lose that playoff game. There's the stubbornness in Mike Zimmer as a defensive-minded head coach. The stubborn belief, I should say, in a coach like Mike Zimmer to carry the Vikings where they want to go, where the franchise wants to go. Seeing more and more now across the league, having an offensive-minded head coach, a sort of a young offensive genius that can, make your quarterback look good, that can hide your deficiencies, and that can create an efficient team. It seems to be the winning formula nowadays. I guess it doesn't have to be a young coach, right? Andy Reid has been doing it for a long time. He's got that Kansas City Chiefs offense humming, and they're not too concerned about the defensive side of the ball, and they keep winning. And so, those couple of things combined with it just seems like there was clearly a window that had been missed, right? The Super Bowl window where you had all of your players, your stars, the homegrown roster. Right. In their peak, and that's past. You got rid of Xavier Rhodes, Linval Joseph, Everson Griffin, all these guys that were so key to your success. They're gone now just because the window had passed, right? You kind of built the contracts so that 2018, 2019, those were your prime years to compete, and it just didn't work out for a myriad of reasons, of course. But you're past that now, and I think it's time to accept, and we as fans did do a good job of accepting that initially, but it's just time to accept that this era is over, and trying to sort of, in desperation, try to make something else happen, try to create a competitive team out of what is much, much less than you had 2 or 3 years ago. It's just not the winning formula, and it's time to start over.
Right. So I agree that stubbornness is definitely a big piece here for sure. We can also, we can throw the Vikings a bone, say injuries played a role here as well. I mean, Anthony Barr being out for the majority of the season, Danielle Hunter officially out for the rest of the season. One of the best decisions the Vikings have made this entire year, by the way.
Yes.
coaching change, I'm sure, has something to do with it as well. I'm not to say that's, Kubiak hasn't got the offense to roll at some points, but you have to think that a little bit more consistency with Stefanski remaining in that position might have helped. So turnover in that regard. And then, of course, turnover with the players that you mentioned. I think us as a fan base thought that the window would be open through 2020, right? That Super Bowl window. I think I used that year multiple times dating back to 2016, I want to say. And that closed faster than I think a lot of us thought. It was not just the Vikings coaching staff. It was us as fans as well, or fanalists, or whatever you want to say, whatever you want to refer to yourself as. I think a lot of us thought the Vikings had at least through 2020, if not through 2021. But the breakdown has just been so severe, and it's been magnified by the injuries and mistakes and the rookies who just simply aren't ready for their roles at this point in time. Cameron Dantzler looks a lot better in the secondary as a number 3 corner. Or, Jeff Gladney looks a lot better rotating in and out with Mackenzie Alexander. Or, so many of these decisions that were made during the offseason that, were kind of forced decisions to a degree because of the contract situation, the financials that the Vikings were dealing with. But those decisions had costs that I think a lot of us were like, oh, Xavier Rhodes gone? Like, how are we going to replace a guy who sucked all of last year? Well, what the Vikings did is they replaced him with a guy who sucks even more often than Xavier Rhodes did last year. And we didn't think that was possible as fans. And I think the administration probably thought the same thing as well. How much worse can it get? Well, unfortunately, the Vikings have gotten that answer in the first 6 weeks. And that's that while Xavier Rhodes was substandard, to say the least, last season, he at least was enough to get the job done most of the time. The Vikings weren't allowing 30-plus points last week every single week. Now we're approaching 40. Hell, Atlanta just laid a 40-burger on the Vikings. This is a defense that, we just talked a couple of weeks ago about how Mike Zimmer's only allowed, 2 or 3 30-point games? Now he's done that season. So a lot of things have gone wrong, and we'd be ignorant to not acknowledge the fact that there's some blame to be handed out here. It's not just like, this isn't a situation where,
teams don't have to be bad. Like, it's not like every team has to go through a cycle of playing poorly.
That's true, but like they also don't they don't need to be this bad ever.
Oh yeah,
you can get by making.
This could have been prevented in a number of ways. It starts with recognizing where things, I think we as fans sometimes get a big head to where we think we can do things better than the people in the front office, which isn't true.
Everyone thinks that.
Right, which isn't true. But, when you have so many fans pointing out things, it's easy to think that. And there are, you could see the faults coming. You could see the roster deconstruction coming in the fact that there's just too much production and talent leaving the roster to then come back confidently and into the 2020 season without an off season, with having so many rookies contributing and just obviously it's easy when you have one team and this is the team that you A, work for, or B, root for, to think, okay, well, we can do this. We just went 10-6. We did this, we did that. And then think, okay, well, we'll be fine this year. We have these players returning, but truth of the matter is the Vikings lost so much, and it's just tough to band-aid all that with rookies or very young, inexperienced guys. And then, a head coach that's defensive minded and trying to do all of that, with a completely new defensive lineup, essentially.
Right.
There was too much turnover. There was too much of there's an old school philosophy on offense too, right? And it doesn't catch up with modern NFL, and things have to be perfect for your quarterback in that scenario. And there's just too much turnover. There's too much that needs to go right for this team right now to compete. And it's gone the other way to start the year.
All right, so that's how we got here, right? Injuries, coronavirus, questionable administrative decisions, questionable contracts extended, not just talking about the players. Just a lot of things this past offseason that I think if we look back with, hindsight bias, we give them an F, right? The Vikings failed in every respect this past offseason. So that's point A. Point B is the coronavirus and all of the consequences and implications that this has had. However, I don't think this podcast or any of you listening is willing to use as an excuse, because every single team, as we've noted multiple times, is also dealing with this situation. So The Vikings had to adapt and they didn't. So that's problem B. And then, of course, you throw in the injuries and other random things. Losing Michael Pierce before the year even started as a result of the coronavirus sucks. That wasn't just a band-aid. That was supposed to be kind of the piece, right, to replace Linval Joseph. And all of a sudden, he's not there. And the guys that you thought would be rotating in and out and would be able to handle 10, 15 snaps are now being asked to cover 40 or 50 of them. And let's just be real here. They're not doing too good at it. Okay? So, I mean, that's just what it is. That's how we got here. And now we're at this point, and now we have decisions to make. And when I say we, I do mean Rick Spielman, the Wilfs, and, the upper management. But we do have the opportunity here to think some of this through and try to, come up with rationale and decision making for ourselves. So, what do you do, right? We know where the Vikings stand as of this recording, right? Yannick Ngakoue is officially gone. He's a member of the Ravens. The Vikings ended up basically trading 90 spots essentially in their draft to have that guy for 6 games, and now he's no longer a foundational piece of this team's future. And they're moving forward with a 3rd-round conditional and a 5th-round conditional, which honestly I think that's a great move. That was the smart move. However, it does suggest that this management believes that they'll be around long term and be able to see those picks through on the other end, which I think some of us might have, some skepticism about given the current circumstances of this organization. But, what do you do? You're 6 games into the year. We just established that there's basically every precedent in the world suggests that the Vikings are going to miss the playoffs, and I'm not going to shy away from that. I don't think anyone else is going to either. So what do you do with the rest of the season to make it useful? How do you make this a better functioning organization for next year? What can you do with your 10 games here? I mean, we're going to be watching. So what are we watching for? Like, what's the point? What is the purpose of the rest of these 10 games? And, what would you like to see?
So this is kind of there's a dichotomy here, right? Where there's, you get half of the fans are kind of saying tank, like lose on purpose, almost trying to get the higher draft pick. You're spending now rooting for Washington and the Jets, the Giants, and all these teams to win, so that can improve the Vikings draft slot. That's not really where I fall into things, and it's really easy to look at this and say, well, yeah, the Vikings getting a better draft pick. Like, of course you want the Vikings to lose games. There's just no way to quantify the sort of winning culture aspect of things, right? And I think the Vikings had built that to a degree over the past few years. And, of course, no team is going to go out there and try to lose, right? But I think the Vikings, building that winning culture with so many rookies already there is going to be really important down the stretch here. So, and whether, I think at this point now you really have to also evaluate Mike Zimmer and his status with the team. If he can put together a formidable defense, string together a few tough wins down the stretch here, maybe he deserves 2021. But I mean, I really think at this point, it's for as much as I love Mike Zimmer and as much as I appreciate, what he's done the past 6 years in Minnesota, I think it's so clear that an offensive-minded coach seems to be the winning formula nowadays, and I think that's the direction the Vikings should go. And then in the draft, you got to look towards quarterback. I mean, it's the most important position in football, and I think you need to find a guy that can improvise and kind of do things when, make things better when things aren't so good around you. And I think that's where Kirk is limited, and that's where the Vikings are struggling, is because Kirk was supposed to be the missing piece, the singular missing piece. And now that so many other pieces are gone now from that puzzle, you're asking Kirk Cousins to basically cover like 16, 17 other pieces of that puzzle on his own, and he's just not that quarterback. So there's a lot of different things. I'm anti-tanking. I kind of want to see how Zimmer does, but ultimately it's probably time to switch directions at head coach. And then, of course, at quarterback, you got to start looking more aggressively at finding your quarterback of the future, because it does not appear that Kirk Cousins is that guy.
So kind of the simple answer to that question is I think we're all looking for some development, right? Whether that's player development, right, in terms of the young personnel's improvement and kind of immersion into the system that they may or may not be playing in next year, which seems kind of dumb in itself to even, look for development in a system that's just not going to be around next year.
Yeah.
Seems a little counterproductive, but beside the point, I think that's kind of what we're all looking for here is we want to see more young guys than just Justin Jefferson shine the rest of the year. That seems pretty obvious here. Now, that question that you brought up regarding winning versus losing and how it affects this team, I mean, we've made it explicitly clear, and I think everyone understands this, that winning is not a good thing long term for this organization right now. I mean, if they win 2 more games
on paper, it's not. It's just
right.
Not
There's nothing good that it can do other than boost that unquantifiable team morale for next season, which I don't think. Again, we can't quantify it, so I'm not going to even figure that into my assessment here. So, in terms of, we all want to see the development. We want to see what Cameron Dantzler, we want to see what Jeff Gladney can do. We want to see if these guys are really foundational pieces. We want to see if Holton Hill can truly become a number 1 or number 2, or if the flashes that we saw his rookie season were lucky, right? We want to see those things. And I think all of that's very obvious. And I think the fact that we want to see what Zimmer can do with this team and kind of his role, if he has one, moving forward. We want to get an answer to that question too. Now, all of those questions can be amplified or hindered by a number of different moves that general management and upper management, upper executives can make. Now, we've seen the first chess piece fall in Ngakoue going to Baltimore, a team that's, trying to find every last piece to win the Super Bowl. And we know that the Vikings team is at the very least, because rumors don't come out of nowhere, right? We know it doesn't always mean, when there's smoke, there's fire. But when there's smoke, there's normally smoke for a reason, right? I understand that doesn't really work with the cliche, but when there's smoke, there's generally some reason for it. And so we hear things like Thielen, Harrison Smith, Kyle Rudolph, all being, on the trade block. And they may not necessarily be, the Vikings may not have called all other 31 organizations saying, hey, these guys are available, let me know what you want. But they may have discussed it with some teams. I mean, you think about the Adam Thielen, fit in a bunch of teams right now, a tall slot receiver that can win you some in big moments. I mean, who wouldn't want him? And realistically, is he in the Vikings' future? I mean, he's 30. He might not be. So, you have to ask these questions. And I think they're fair questions to ask, especially for upper management who's trying to save their job and is trying to make all the right decisions now because they made the wrong ones this past offseason. Will there be an overcorrection? I'm sure, because they're trying to resolve mistakes that they made and also mistakes that just came up as a result of just, annual football. Did the Vikings think they're going to have to wonder whether or not Danielle Hunter would ever be the same guy again just 2 months ago? No, they didn't, and none of us did either. But now you got a pec injury that's going to keep you out for a whole year. You have to wonder, will he be the same guy? I'm sure he will be. Modern medicine is great, but you have to wonder these things. You have to come up with a calculated plan for the worst case scenario, which is what the Vikings didn't do this last offseason. So that's something that I want to see. I want to see calculated moves that show a general direction that I can identify as a fan reading the news.
Yes.
So I want it to be so freaking clear what the Vikings want to do that a media member of any variety, whether it's the 24-year-old kid going to training camp for his first time or Chris Thomason on his 40th year on the beat or whatever it is. I don't care who it is. I want it to be so transparent that I can pick it up from reading 1 or 2 articles. And I think that shows something. I want Rick Spielman to say, hey, this is the move, this is the direction we're going. We're going to make these moves and we're going to suffer the consequences and we're also going to reap the benefits in April. That's what we're going to do here. So if they get rid of Harrison Smith, do I want to see Harrison Smith leave? Absolutely not. He's been one of my favorite players that this team has ever had. He's probably the best safety you can make an argument for Krause, I'm sure, and I'm sure many of you will, but he's the best safety I've ever personally watched. But he'd fetch a price on the market right now. And again, I'm going to ask the same question I just did 2 seconds ago with Adam Thielen. Is he part of this team's next chance to win a Super Bowl? I don't know if he is. And he has so much value elsewhere right now that you have to think, okay, if you can get a late first or potentially a mid-second or some variation of, a number of other options that trades, potentially will become available, you have to think about it. And these are moves that could influence the direct, the landscape of what this season can what the Vikings can do this season. That landscape can be directly influenced by just 2 moves. If the Vikings trade Harrison Smith and Adam Thielen, they're not winning more than 4 games. If you take those 2 guys off this organization, draft picks, I'm not saying I want to see him leave. It's going to make watching this team a lot less fun, but that's a direction. That's something that I can get behind because it's literally its management saying, hey, we aren't good enough. We know it. We're not going to try to do some kind of combination of a rebuild and, a reload. We're going to go straight rebuild. We're going to do it now. And in 2023, we hope that we're going to have our quarterback of the future, plenty of cap room to work with, a bunch of developed players on their beginning of their second contract, and we're looking like a team that can compete with, an older Lamar Jackson in the Super Bowl, if you will.
Yeah. So this reminds me of Miami because Miami in 2018, I think they narrowly missed the playoffs. Like they were maybe a game or two out of a wild card spot in the AFC. And then, they in 2019, they, began the year with Rosen. Or not Rosen. Or yeah, it was Rosen. They traded for Rosen. And wasn't working out. And so, they realized quickly on, right? Like Miami was bad at the beginning of last season, 2019. So they realized, hey, this isn't working. We're going to start over. And they had just hired a new head coach, by the way. And so they traded all of their valuable pieces on that team. Kenyon Drake, Minka Fitzpatrick, like they traded anything with value. And of course, it resulted in what, like a 5-11 or 4-12 record. Now they've got their franchise quarterback, Tua Tagovailoa. And they've got some pieces that I think they're not winning, a title probably this year or winning a division title in the AFC East, but there is a clear sense of direction, right? I don't want to say tanked, but
they fell apart.
They traded anything of value to start over. And so that shows a clear sense of direction, and it would make sense if Miami is, contending in 2 to 3 years. Because they've built it from the ground up. They have a ton of draft picks coming up, right? They have Houston's first and second next year, I'm pretty sure. Which Houston, by the way, that is not how you rebuild what they're doing.
Right. You don't want to Houston. You got to be afraid of that now.
Yeah. And so Miami has a clear sense of direction. The Vikings, based on this past offseason, there is none because they got rid of so much production, and they kind of had to because of the cap, right? They had, all these contracts that they were millions and millions over the salary cap, so they had to let some guys go. Then they traded Diggs, which may or may not have been what they actually wanted to do. But regardless, when you get rid of that much production, that much talent, that's going to indicate to anybody, okay, well, that's time to rebuild because this roster is it's a shell of what it was just a year ago. But the Vikings did not give that vibe to anybody. And so now they kind of like the analogy I kept using from Matthew Collar was, they came to a fork in the road, and instead of picking left or right, they went right up the middle. And it leaves them lost. It leaves myself and you as well, like confused. Like, what is the direction here? There really isn't one. And so that's where you talk about Harrison Smith, Adam Thielen, Cal Rudolph. Like, these are the guys like, Riley Reef, another one, guys that are, they're not young. They probably wouldn't be effective or to the level they are now players. The next time the Vikings will be realistically contending for a deep playoff run. There's a great argument to be made to get the value now for those guys, whether it's a first round pick, whether it's, a second and a fourth, or whether it's whatever it is, get that value now. And I mean, Rick should be chomping at the bit here because he loves hoarding draft picks.
Right.
To get as many as he can, get that value, and then get as much developmental potential time for your young rookies as you can this season, which is what Miami did last year, and start that rebuilding process. And then hopefully you can kind of make a move and try to find a quarterback in this draft, no matter, I think there's probably 4 or 5 right now that are going to go in that first round. Try to be aggressive and get one of those guys to, at the very least, sit behind Kirk Cousins next year.
So I think since you brought it up, I think it was going to come up no matter what, but that quarterback spot, right? The Vikings need to do something there, right? They need to have a plan. And I mean, when I say a plan, someone other than Sean Mannion needs to be backing up Kirk Cousins next season, right? I would like it to be Trevor Lawrence. I would like it to be Justin Fields,
I don't think that's realistic.
I don't think it's necessarily realistic. You're right, because I don't think they're gonna have to draft in the top probably five, probably honestly probably top three to get one of those two guys.
One of those
They
two,
get-
they'll have to draft top two. That's the first two picks in the draft is Lawrence and Fields.
okay, so someone's got to be behind Cousins next year, and someone needs to challenge him in a way where if he again is playing like trash and it's not doing any good for anyone involved, there needs to be someone with the authority to say, "Hey, I can be the future."
Someone
And,
pushing him at least.
right.
Instead of Sean Mannion.
Please. Exactly. So that needs to happen, and that's unfortunately not an answer we can get now. So we have to wait, but that needs to be something you need to be thinking about, right? And I think that goes back to your hoarding draft picks point there, that if you hoard enough draft picks, you're going to have the ability to move up to the spot you need to be in order to get the guy that you believe is the next guy, right? Jordan Reed just brought up mobility as kind of being a necessity for quarterbacks in the modern era, and I mean it's hard to deny that point, right?
If you watch the Sunday night game between Arizona and Seattle, how can you disagree with that?
Exactly.
Both of those teams are 5-2 and like 6-1 or 5-1. They're clearly set on the right path. They've got a young offensive mind. Well, Arizona does. Cliff Kingsbury, who, by the way, not a great record in college. I think he was below 500, but he's clearly knows what he's doing offensively. Get him at the right quarterback, a young, guy that can improvise. That's the mold, that's the model to win in the NFL in 2020. The Vikings are pretty much doing the opposite of that with a defensive-minded coach and a quarterback that needs complete, stable structure around him.
The Vikings are playing in 1988 right now.
Right. And that's the thing about Kirk. When the structure is right, he will execute the offense to a T better than pretty much any quarterback in the league. Sit in the pocket, clean pocket, and he'll throw darts all day. But the Vikings just aren't set up that way right now.
And everything is off schedule football now. Like
mm-hmm.
there isn't the Jay Gruden quote. I'm just going to go back to that about how much can you really do? How much can you truly scheme open? You have to play off schedule in the NFL, and the quarterback position used to be 3, 5, and 7-step drops and fire, right? You wait for your guy to be there and you throw the ball. Unfortunately, that's not how the NFL is anymore. Most teams, most teams have more intermediate and longer developing routes where you straight up just need to have some flexibility in the pocket. You need to have some awareness. You need to move your feet. And I'm not saying Kirk can't do that. He clearly is physically capable. We've made enough jokes about how sometimes he gets loose for 10, 15, 20 yards and he looks athletic. Like, I don't know what the mental block is, but it's not there for him, right? He doesn't have that maneuverability in the pocket that makes Russell Wilson and Kyler Murray to kind of put it on the top of that scale, right? The mobility scale. Those two make Cousins look like an old man. And if you want to compete in this league, you need to at least have Patrick Mahomes' athleticism at the quarterback position. And that Patrick Mahomes can still move pretty well, right? Like, he's not exactly a slouch back there. But you need to have some functioning ability to play off schedule, which Kirk Cousins does not have. So I think you need to start looking quarterback, and you need to start looking at this modern model, right? And, was it Trey Lance, Dakota State? I mean, he fits that mold. You look at Justin Fields, I think he's probably the more kind of the perfect mold in that sense.
Who's the BYU guy? Is it Wilson maybe? Zach Wilson, I think is his name. He's another guy that we'll be seeing a lot about him as well. But that's, you look around the league, and probably 10 years ago, that really wasn't the case. You didn't draft guys because they could, operate off schedule. That wasn't the first trait you're looking for. But with the need to score points becoming, so much more important now, it's just coaches can scheme up points, and points are at a premium now. Like, you have to be able to score, and you have to, offense wins championships now. As much as you hate to kind of put it that way, but it's the way the game is now. And that's where the quarterback that can improvise, make plays kind of by himself almost when things break down, can be so valuable, because otherwise it's really easy to pick out one or two ways to beat a team, get that done, and then boom, that offense is toast. That's where the Vikings have struggled with Kirk, right? So yeah, that's how the Packers were so great in early 2010s. Aaron Rodgers was one of the few guys in the league that pocket collapses, play breaks down, he can still rip off a 30-yard gain down the sideline to James Jones or somebody. And now there's 4, 5, 6 quarterbacks in the league that are doing that, and those teams are, towards the top of the standings right now.
And I think that if you're the Vikings, and we really haven't even talked about the Vikings for the last 5 minutes here, but if you're the Vikings, you have to look at all of this information, all this new information. I'm not just talking about the analytics movement. I'm not just talking about, kind of these advanced statistics that are coming out, the next gen stats, if you will. I'm talking about look at the information that's being presented to you literally on all of our TVs on Sunday Night Football. Like you just said, the way that the offenses function in Seattle and Arizona should make organizations like Minnesota puke, straight up. Because the Vikings can't do any of that. They just don't have the capacity because they don't have the personnel. So this can be an exciting time too, right? Like this is a terrible position to be in as a Vikings fan right now. Your team has for, you've only got a couple of young commodities to really look at and be excited about, but there are things to look forward to in the immediate future, right? You get Danielle Hunter back next year. You get Michael Pierce back next year. So your problems on the defensive line probably resolved without even lifting a finger. And when I say resolved, I do mean functional. I don't mean perfect like they were a couple years ago. I mean functional. But you get those two pieces back, all pro level players. All of a sudden that D-line looks a lot better with Shamar Stephen in the middle, right? And you get Anthony Barr back next year. Eric Kendricks remains under contract. You got to feel okay about that. Now, if you could see some development at the defensive back positions, you could be okay next year if you make a couple tweaks. But you have to start modernizing your style. And that one of those tweaks, when I say little tweak, I mean like a one transaction move. It could still be a huge maneuver, right? Whether that's replacing Mike Zimmer with Arthur Brown or Eric Bieniemy or one of these other guys that's going to pop into the market that's going to become the hot name. Yes, Joe Brady would be another awesome one, right? You can do all of these things, and you have the opportunity to be a choice landing spot because you have high draft picks, because you have a good administration and kind of you have a good situation for a coach to walk into. You have all these pieces, and then the Vikings could theoretically go get the guy of the future, bridge him with Cousins, let Cousins go in 2022, and you've reset in 2 years. But you need to make all the right moves now. And that's why when I see people react to these podcasts and we say things like, is it time to start over? And people are like, no, let's not start over. Well, what information are you looking at? I'm talking objectively speaking right now. The Vikings have basically no shot. What are you playing for? Why don't you want to start over? What have you seen? I genuinely wanted to answer this question. What have you seen that suggests that this team is going to be Super Bowl ready with the status quo? Things need to change. Something needs to happen. I'm not saying get rid of Mike Zimmer because I don't know if that's the right move, but something needs to happen. And it needs to be big enough where there's a true ripple effect.
It just acknowledge that the season's lost almost, right? Like don't play dumb and think, oh yeah, we're gonna make a run here, get to the playoffs, and we definitely have the defense, we definitely have the offense to make a run. That does not work. It certainly doesn't resonate with the fans, but it cannot be the case, and it probably isn't the case behind closed doors. There's no way they're looking at this like, well, yeah, we're right in the thick of this. Just need to turn a couple things around, and we're going to be in the playoffs. Like, no, acknowledge that you failed. Acknowledge that this season is just simply not turning out the way you expected, and that's fine to be wrong. Like, that's okay. That you thought this team was competitive in the NFC prior to the season. Things have not gone your way. Anthony Barr, Danielle Hunter being out, of course, does not help. But just acknowledge that this season probably is a fail, and make the moves now while you can before the trade deadline to help yourself in the future. And I'm not trying to advocate that get Adam Thielen out of here, get Harrison Smith out of here, get Kyle Rudolph out of here because I don't like them or because they're not productive. It's just you got to set yourself up for the future when there's nothing to play for now, and that's kind of where the Vikings are at.
That is where the Vikings are at. So Vikings are through 6 weeks. There's 10 more of them left, and I mean Drew and I will be here, breaking down what happened and what to expect for the remainder of the season. We're hoping you guys are here too, but at this current juncture, like this is where it's at, guys. Like this, I don't like. There's no like. I'm not gonna blow.
We're not trying to be like negative or overly negative or like trying to take the air out of your sails or anything like that. like the wind out of your sails. It's just, this is just the way it is. Like, this is like, other NFL teams have rebuilt from better positions than the Vikings are in right now.
Right.
And I think it's, the Vikings need to understand that. And it's not, you either, here's the options. You turn this thing around, win 10 of your final however many games.
10 out of your next 10.
Or 9 out of your next 10, I guess. I'm saying get to 10 wins, get into the playoffs somehow. Or you you figure your crap out for the future, for 2021, 2022, with the limited options that you have now. And so that you can make a playoff run in 2022, for example, or 2023. Because if you're not going to make a plan now for the future, then you're banking on making a run this year with this team and this roster and this coaching staff. That just doesn't seem very likely to me.
Doesn't seem likely to me either. So, all right, folks, that's what we got for you today. I think that's a good point to end on. Let us know your thoughts, right? I'm curious what you guys have to say too. Like, I try to gauge kind of fan standing by Twitter, and I don't think that's always the most representative truth. Honestly, I think that blog commenters are a lot more objective and straightforward. So feel free to share your thoughts with me here. Like, is there something more to look forward to other than just the development of the Vikings players? I'd love to hear it because, like I said, I'm going to be watching these games. I'm still a fan of this team, and I'm going to be dedicating 3-4 hours every Sunday to this team. So I'm here for it. Let me know what you have to think as well. You can leave that comment in the Daily Norseman comment section as always. And you can find the rest of the Climbing the Pocket Network on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts. And as always, for the several of you that do like to watch this on video, Drew and I will be on YouTube for your viewing pleasure. So later on this week, we will be previewing that upcoming matchup, which doesn't look great, against the Green Bay Packers at Lambeau Field. So we hope you will join us for that. Should be another fun listen, I'm sure. So thanks as always for listening, and we will catch you later this week.